world. Right, to get things started, what I would like to do is now invite our first speaker, without any delays, is Katie Doherty, who is the CEO of the International Meat Trade Association in the UK. Katie, if I can just ask you to come on, and what I'll do is I'll give you the access to do your presentation, and if you can just let everybody have an insight on your presentation, and then we can move forward. Over to you, Katie. I'll turn off now. Thank you.
Good morning all, or perhaps good afternoon or good evening. So I understand that the audience is actually very international. So yeah, good morning or good day to everyone. Firstly, let me thank the World Halal Authority for inviting me to speak at this webinar on the topic of Brexit. I will do a very brief introduction to the International Meat Trade Association, and then I will look both at exporting to the EU from the UK and also importing from the EU into the UK. I'm going to consider tariffs, customs and veterinary aspects. I will also touch on rules of origin, which many of you will probably have heard if you're based in the UK or the EU. You might have heard mentioned quite a few times in the last week. They have an important bearing on tariffs between the EU and the UK, so I will mention them within my presentation. There are many other aspects, but given time, I will cover these specific aspects at a very high level. I'll take, I think, questions at the end or in the panel session. Okay, so if I move to my slides. So the International Meat Trade Association has existed since about 1895. We're a UK-based trade association representing predominantly importers and exporters that are based in the UK of beef, lamb, pork and poultry meat. But we also have associate members such as shipping lines, freight forwarders, customs agents, cold storage providers and levy boards. And we are a member of the European Meat and Livestock Trading Union, and we continue to be, even though the UK has now left the EU. So we believe two-way trade is essential to delivering carcass balance, food security and consumer choice. Trade is at the heart of what we do. This is the very small but brilliant IMTA team. My colleagues are working extremely hard at the moment to assist our members at this challenging time. And in the first 2 days of last week, we received in excess of 100 queries from our membership on the topic of Brexit. So we're working hard to try and assist them as best we can. This is just a brief summary of what we do as a trade association. Essentially, we lobby on behalf of our members for the best outcomes in government policy making. We provide them with information, statistics or information on changing policy and legislation, and we provide a query service to our members. So that was hopefully a very brief introduction to who we are. So now on to the meat of the presentation. I have to say it has been a busy few weeks, to say the least. I don't think many affected by Brexit will have had many days off or many weekends not worked in the last few weeks. On the 24th of December, an agreement was finally reached between the EU and the UK. And I think it had felt quite touch and go. It is called the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, and for brevity during the presentation, I will refer to it simply as the TCA. The text of the agreement was subsequently published, and we and others have been working as rapidly as possible to decipher the key aspects for our industry. The UK Parliament passed the Future Relationship Bill on the 29th of December, and the EU made provisions for the agreement to provisionally apply as of the 1st of January. And the EU, I think, still wanted time to properly scrutinise the agreement, given that it was agreed so late in the day, given that we were leaving at 11 o'clock on the 31st of December. So what does the agreement mean for business? By and large, preparations that businesses were making for no deal also apply to the current situation with a deal. I promised to talk about three key areas: tariffs, customs and veterinary. So if I take those in reverse, veterinary, there was no special agreement reached in the TCA that would mean any reductions in certification or veterinary checks between the EU and the UK. In terms of customs, though there is commitment in the agreement to further cooperation on this topic, there was no outcome in the TCA that means any alterations to the requirements for customs declarations. Tariffs, this is the main area that the TCA alters versus no deal. And the TCA means there are no tariffs or quotas between the trade partners. But, and it is a big caveat, that is only if the goods meet the requisite rules of origin and the relevant proofs of origin are arranged. So I'll come on to those topics in a little more detail now. I'm going to take them first with tariffs and rules of origin. The rules of origin requirements under the deal and deciphering them has taken up much of the last week for us. And we ran a briefing session last Monday with both DEFRA, which is our Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs in the UK, and HMRC, the UK Customs Authority, where it was clear that an hour was not sufficient time to cover all the questions that our member companies wanted answered on this topic. Under the TCA, in order to be able to access the zero tariff arrangements for meat, they must meet the rules of origin written down in the TCA. And the rules of origin for meat and animal products are often very strict and inflexible in free trade agreements generally, and that is the case with the TCA. So how do you access the zero tariff for meat? The general rule is that Chapter 2 or 16 goods, that's the tariff classification chapters, 2 being kind of unprocessed meat and 16 being more processed products. Under the TCA, these goods must be wholly obtained, which means that they must come from animals born, reared and slaughtered in the UK or in the EU in order to get that zero tariff. There is also something called bilateral cumulation, which allows in certain circumstances for UK manufacturers to use EU inputs and be able to access the zero tariff when the good is re-exported to the EU. But the rules will be slightly different for different products. So one of the key commercial considerations businesses in both EU and UK will have to work through is what rules of origin mean in terms of tariffs into the other market and what their kind of manufacturing processes might need to consider. The other key thing that flows from rules of origin is ensuring you have the evidence that goods are originating. This is important for when customs do their checks or audits that can happen later down the line, where they will ask for evidence that your goods were eligible for the preferential tariff of zero under the TCA. And there is detail on this in the trade agreement, but HMRC in the UK has also issued guidance on this, and there's a link in the slide to that. It's one of the many pieces of guidance that UK government has issued in the last few weeks, flowing from the late agreement on the 24th of December. So I'd expect most people will have quite a long bedtime reading list as a result. I certainly do. In the next two slides, I'm going to focus first on customs aspects of exporting to the EU from GB, so Great Britain, and then I will consider the veterinary aspects. I will then talk about importing from the EU into Great Britain. You will note that I'm referring to Great Britain rather than the United Kingdom, and the reason is that because of the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is a simultaneously kind of negotiated agreement, the rules for trading with Northern Ireland are slightly different. So if you are exporting from Great Britain to the EU, a customs export declaration from Great Britain is required, and a corresponding import customs declaration is required for entering it into the EU. On the slide, you will see an extract of an EU customs declaration. It's called a C88 document, or it's also referred to as a SAD document. And that isn't, unfortunately, just a name that I've given it, that is its official name. So you either need to do this yourself or find a customs agent who is able to do that on your behalf. From a veterinary standpoint, in exporting to the EU from Great Britain, the good news is that just before Christmas, the UK was given approved third country listing, meaning that the UK is allowed to export to the EU. So this means that we have an approved animal health status, we've got an approved residue plan, and we also have plants that are listed for export to the EU, as any other third country is required to do if they want to export to the EU. As exporters, you need to consider firstly that you now need an export health certificate for goods moving into the EU, and you also need a vet that is able to sign this for you. You also need to make sure that consignments of meat entering the EU are pre-notified in the EU system called Traces, or you can get an agent who is able to do this for you. The legal requirement under the official controls on imports is that this has to be done 24 hours prior, but there is a derogation that allows this to be 4 hours if the border control post of entry allows for that. Then you also need to make sure your goods now enter the EU via a border control post, where it will be subject to veterinary checks. There was no special arrangement agreed in the TCA, so we fully expect the EU checks on UK product will be in line with other rest of world countries. So that means 100% of consignments entering the EU will be documentary checked. They'll check the health certificate and ID checked. So they might check the seal. They might also open the container to check that that matches up with what's in there and what's on the certificate. And then there will be physical checks of consignments. So the rates for these for beef and lamb is 15% and 30% for poultry meat. Unfortunately, we weren't able to achieve something better, like for example, New Zealand has a veterinary equivalence agreement, which means though there are 100% documentary and ID checks, they only face 1% of physical checks on their beef and lamb entering the EU. So there are many new elements that supply chains need to consider in exporting to the EU. I'll now turn to importing from the EU to Great Britain. It's not a mirror image of what I've just outlined for exporting to the EU, so it is a complicated picture. This is because the UK announced in June last year it would introduce phased border controls so that they could get infrastructure in place, but also to give traders a little bit more time to prepare. So from a veterinary standpoint, the UK does not require pre-notification or veterinary certification until April of this year. There is one caveat to that, where if your goods are subject to safeguard measures in the EU, a certificate would be required, but generally it's not till April that that requirement comes in. And it will only be from July of this year where physical veterinary checks will take place on EU imports. And the UK government has indicated this will be a minimum of 1%. So at present, generally, you don't have to enter via a BCP if your goods are from the EU when arriving in Great Britain. In terms of customs, you are required to make arrangements for a customs declaration, and you can either do this as a frontier declaration, like the SAD document in the earlier slide, or you can choose to defer the declaration for up to 6 months. However, you need to follow the HMRC guidance very carefully to ensure you're keeping records of your imports and that you have in place the facility to do this required supplementary declaration at a later date. Again, this will be important if later you receive an audit from HMRC, our customs authority. I was asked to speak about the commercial implications of Brexit, and this slide is one of the most critical because Incoterms are an important determinant in who in your supply chain is responsible for the new steps. As I outlined above, who is responsible for the customs declaration, for example. On the slide are the various Incoterms that exist, and these are established by the International Chambers of Commerce, and there's a link in the slide to where you can get hold of these in a digital app form. I think you can also get hold of them in hard copy, but there's also various sources of information online. The basic purpose of each Incoterm is to clarify how functions, costs and risks are split between the buyer and the seller in connection with the delivery of the goods as required by the sales contract. As there are these additional requirements for declaration, certification, etc., there are now more responsibilities, and that means that the terms you may have traded on whilst the UK was in the EU may need to be reviewed. And actually, as we speak, IMTA members I think it's the fourth time we've run a session on Incoterms because it is so crucial in terms of Brexit. I'm just very briefly going to touch on non-EU imports into the UK, though I've mainly focused on EU-UK movements. So imports coming into the UK from rest of world will either face the global tariff, as the UK announced back in May, or if there's a free trade agreement that has been rolled over, there might be quotas or lower tariffs available. So for example, the Japan-UK agreement, the UK managed to roll over the agreement that the EU had with Japan. or there may be a share of an existing World Trade Organization WTO tariff rate quota. And the EU and the UK have agreed a split of the quotas, and there has been some negotiation in Geneva at the WTO with partners such as Thailand about the shares that the UK and EU had proposed. So there are quotas available for import into the UK based on these shares that we've taken of the original EU 28 quotas. I'm just going to move to the next slide. So this has been called the TRQ apportionment. And if I take an example that's kind of an easy one that I always go to, the New Zealand sheep meat quota, which before we left, so up until the 31st of December, it was 228,000 tonnes for import into the EU, but that has now been split between the UK and the EU. So roughly, we've taken about 114,000 tonnes each. For some of the quotas, there have been some negotiated adjustments to this, and there may be more coming down the track depending on how negotiations go in Geneva. So Thai poultry meat is one where there have been some adjustments to what was originally proposed. So in conclusion, there are many things that Brexit changes for supply chains, and the TCA's rules of origin will take a bit of time for supply chains to decipher what the commercial implications are. Brexit is not yet done. We are only just starting to see the implications of these new requirements, and it will take a while yet to see the full effects. As I mentioned, negotiations in Geneva for some of the quota shares are ongoing. And the UK also has plans for things like having the best border by 2025, so there's work ongoing on that. And the UK is also looking to negotiate its own free trade agreements. The Brexit and its consequences are still something that we will see as time moves on.